of the 14th Istanbul Biennial. Today we have Beatriz Colomina with us, and she has kindly accepted to talk within our program. Beatriz Colomina is an architectural historian and theorist. She has written extensively on questions of architecture and media, and her work has been published in over 25 languages. She's professor of architecture and founding director of the interdisciplinary program in media and modernity at Princeton University. Her books include Manifesto Architecture, The Ghost of Mayes, Clip Stamp Fold, The Radical Architecture of Little Magazines, 19XX, 197X, 2010, Domesticity at War, Privacy and Publicity, and Sexuality and Space. Colomina will co-create with Mark Wigley the 2016 third Istanbul Design Biennial, and we're so happy to have her. Thank you very much. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be here. I had, I think, some long relationship with this city, and it was a matter of great pride and satisfaction for me when Privacy and Publicity was translated into Turkish by Metis precisely. So very happy to be also part of this fantastic Biennale that Caroline Christoph has put together, Salt Water, a theory of thought forms. It's really very special to be also in this opening day of this incredible exhibition, which is radiating through the city, across and under the water. And as you know, Caroline was very inspired by Annie Besant, and her Biennale is, in her view, well, I think it's a beautiful interpretation and an expansion of the theories of Annie Besant, who you see here in the screen, and some of her drawings, but also you may have seen them already in the exhibition. In this direction, there is these beautiful, colorful drawings of thought forms. The idea that you could give forms to thought. And as Caroline also pointed out this morning, it's all about giving visible form to the invisible. These images that are in the exhibition are part of this book that also she borrowed for the title of the Biennale, the book that she wrote with David Ledbetter, you know, what a name, in 901, which is precisely thought forms, right? And so she's borrowed this. But as you can see outside in the exhibition, some of those images precede the book. They are not from 901, but they are from 1890 something. And I think that's significant because those are the years that I will call the invisible, or the years of the invisible. And it's not by chance, for example, that the images that I have chosen to show here in the screen look a little bit like X-rays. And in fact, what I want to talk about here today is a parallel story of the invisible, which is also at the intersection of science and the occult, and that I have called X-ray intimacy. And it's the story that begins with the discovery of the X-ray by Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen here on the screen. When he first published this recent discovery of the X-ray, this is December of 1895, in an article entitled "On a New Kind of Rays, a Preliminary Communication," he wrote precisely immediately about a new form of transparency in which he says bodies behave to X-rays as turbid media to light. The invisible rays are described by Röntgen, therefore, as a medium that penetrates objects and is revealed on screens. A floating technical surface, in other words, as in this sketch here of the period, is acting as the most intimate witness of this otherwise hidden interior. And architecture, in other words, is established already that inverts the classical relationship between inside and outside. And architecture that we could say we are still, this is the laboratory where all this took place, and I'll show you this image here. You see the primitive quality of all these cables and this architecture where this extraordinary discovery took place, and this is some of his equipment. But I said it's architecture that is established with the invention of the X-rays, an architecture that inverts the relationship between inside and outside. It's an architecture that you can say we still are living in, with our countless screens monitoring invisible floors. Architects, historians, and theorists quickly absorb the new paradigm of the X-ray, developing an entirely new logic of the invisible in the early decades of the 20th century that remains largely in place. Today we are experiencing new medical screens that are creating new forms of architecture. The relationship between inside and outside is of course growing through one more twist, if you want, and new forms of intimacy are emerging. This, for example, is an image that reveals a specific kind of pathways underlying cognitive functions. There are about 100,000 miles of these fibers in each brain, and this is an MRI of the brain where they put 94 miniature antennas in this helmet on your brain and to pick up the radio waves. So architects are still in many ways fascinated by this, by the cutting edge of research into the brain and medicine, and I think it's having an effect also on how we understand architecture. But then let me back up and go to the effect that the X-ray had in architecture at the beginning of the century. If we go back to the paper of Röntgen, even before Röntgen mentions the word X-rays, he's already describing this new concept in the second paragraph of the paper, this new concept of transparency, which is intimately linked to the idea of a screen. The screen is actually made of a piece of paper that is coated with a thin layer of barium platinum cyanide that glows fluorescent when exposed to the X-ray. He marvels at the fact that the paper itself is very transparent when seen through such a fluorescent screen. So the screen is really just this thin layer of barium platinum cyanide. But it's not just a sheet of paper that is transparent, that is almost normal. Even a 1,000-page book like the one he has right there is transparent in the screen. Thick blocks of wood, he says, are still transparent. Tin foil needs many layers to hardly cast a shadow on the screen, and it takes a very thick piece of aluminium to reduce the fluorescence. Röntgen screen saw, in his own words in the report, that all bodies possess this same transparency, but in varying degrees. Transparency, therefore, is a property of seemingly opaque bodies, including the human body. In other words, transparency is not an effect. The X-ray is not something done to an object. The object is already transparent, and the X-ray is simply allowing you to see it as such. The whole world, all of a sudden, is understood to be transparent. Having studied transparency of new materials, including glass, which he is perplexed, that is more opaque than other materials, precisely because it contains lead, he finally looks through the human body. And here, there are other people experimenting with this thing around that time, of course. And when he experiments with the body, he writes this thing: if the hand, in the report, is the hand beheld before the fluorescent screen, the shadow shows the bones darkly with only faint outlines of the surrounding tissues. And this, of course, is the famous image of the hand of his wife, Bertha, with her fat wedding ring in her third finger, and taking only 5 days before he submits the article for publication, and using it as illustration, even as the proof of this astonishing revelation. Well, the story of this image is absolutely crucial to the popular success of the invention. And it's a funny story because Röntgen, of course, was afraid to reveal this astonishing discovery to his colleagues. So on the evening of December 22nd, 1895, after months of experimenting with inanimate objects, he dragged his wife basically to his studio and exposed her hand for 15 minutes to the X-ray, producing the very first X-ray image of a human body. Upon seeing the image of her hand, Bertha Röntgen apparently said, "I have seen my own death," anticipating a common popular reaction to such images. This is, for example, just Life magazine a couple of months later. Everybody has this association between X-rays and death. X-ray Röntgen article stimulated an enormous double reaction. Scientists all around the world seized upon the idea and tried to replicate the experiment. And on the other hand, the popular press also was super fascinated and ignited a whole speculation about the possible uses and meaning of such images. Newspapers were galvanized by the idea of an invisible world. The image of Bertha's hand gave way to a whole genre of such images in both scientific and popular publications. Countless images of hands, for example, made by Röntgen, but by others too, were made. For example, Röntgen already photographed the hand of this Professor Kolliker, who was a famous anatomist at the university, where he gave his first lecture on the discovery the 13th of January of 1896. And during the lecture, Röntgen did the X-ray of his hand. Summoned to Berlin by the emperor, nonetheless, to report on the discovery, he also photographed the hand of the Emperor Wilhelm II and the Empress Augusta Victoria. Later, he also did the hands of the Duke and Duchess of York, of the Emperor and Empress of Russia, among many other notables. In other words, including King George and Queen Mary in 1896, I mean, all these royal people having their X-ray done, either by Röntgen or by somebody else. So what is really extraordinary is that X-ray of the hand, and I could not find a more beautiful image that this delicate hand with this beautiful ring there, the X-ray, and this is the point, has become a new kind of intimate portrait and the icon of a new world view, a world view in which everything, no matter how seemingly impervious, becomes intimate. Röntgen had named the famous mysterious phenomenon X-rays because he didn't know what these rays were. Kolliker actually, during that famous lecture at the university, had proposed that they would be called Röntgen rays, but self-effacing Röntgen said absolutely not, that they should be called X-rays. The justification of the word rays, on the other hand, he's completely sure about it. He claims in that very first article that he calls them rays because of the shadow pictures, those are his words, produced by interposing a body between the source of the X-ray and a photographic plate or a screen. Röntgen wrote that he had observed and photographed many such shadow images, including a set of weights inside a wooden box, a compass car, a needle, completely enclosed inside a metal case, etc. All of this in the 2 months before he dared to photograph his wife's hand. Röntgen considered this ability to make photographs of these shadow pictures on the screen of special interest, he says, because it makes possible to exhibit the phenomena so as to exclude the danger of error. So the main advantage for him of the possibility of making pictures of this is to provide proof to confirm the observations of what he had been done multiple times in the laboratory with the screen. Now he could prove it by showing you the photograph. Soon after the publication, he sent reprints of these images and the article itself to many scientists, including Emil Barbour in Berlin and Henri Poincaré in Paris. Barbour immediately added the X-rays to an exhibition that was already being organized on the occasion of the Berlin Physical Society at Berlin University, and this was actually the first public exhibition of the X-rays. The point here is that without these images, the discovery of the X-ray would have been of much less interest, both to the scientific circles and to the layman circles. It was front news in every possible newspaper and worldwide. The Presse of Vienna was the first to report on the discovery. Again, it was through a scientist that Röntgen has contacted and sent the pictures and the article, and his brother-in-law was in the newspaper business, and the next day the news are in the Presse with a sensational discovery is the title. In their haste, they misspelled his name. Instead of Röntgen, they wrote Röntgen with a U. The following day, the London Standard cabled the following news release to the world. This is already arriving in New York, but this is the London Standard cabling to the world. The noise of war's alarm should not distract from the marvelous triumph of science, which is reported from Vienna. It is announced that Professor Röntgen, again repeating the mistake in misspelling mistake, of Würzburg University, has discovered a light which for the purpose of photography will penetrate wood, flesh and most other organic substances. The professor has succeeded in photographing metal waves which were enclosed in a wooden case, also a man's hand, which shows only the bones and the flesh becoming invisible. When the London Standard, the printed paper, reported in the story on the paper on the next day, January 7th, 1896, they felt obliged to add that the press, that is the Presse of Vienna, assures its readers that there is no joke or humbug in the matter. It is a serious discovery by a serious German professor. The Frankfurt Zeitung also published the news on the same day, January 7, and was actually the first newspaper to print the images. Very possible because they are in Germany and they could get the images, where by cable you cannot send images. Anyway, newspapers around the world, from Paris Matin to the Krakow Polish newspaper SAS to the New York Times, the St. Louis Dispatch, the Sydney Telegraph, among many others, continue to sensationalize the discovery, anticipating, and this is interesting because it's the popular press that anticipated the medical use of the discovery, something that Röntgen and other scientists were very skeptical about it. Since only text could be sent by cable, most of these early reports overseas were not illustrated, prompting skepticism among readers and even journalists all over the place. For example, the Polish newspaper SAS wrote, "The problem, although it seems an all fool's days joke, is seriously considered in serious circle." Again, serious, like in the other ones, it's a serious professor, serious discovery by a serious professor. Many people follow on Röntgen's invention, developing techniques for photographing the X-ray effect. Röntgen had refused several offers to patent the discovery. Particularly Americans were offering him to have a patent for this X-ray, but he refused, declaring it that it belonged to humanity, the discovery. And it's kind of heartbreaking to discover that he died practically in absolute poverty, so he refused all these offers. From the beginning, Röntgen also provided extremely detailed accounts of the methods, allowing others to experiment. And between a month of the discovery, these people, for example, Joseph Maria Eder, director of the Austrian Institute for Graphic Processes, and his photochemist Edward Valenta, published this book, Research on Photography with Röntgen Rays, which is an album of 15 photographs made with X-rays, where they describe in great detail the procedure used and the improvements they have made themselves to Röntgen apparatus. In this album you see human hands, feet, fish, frogs, a snake, a chameleon, a lizard, a rat, a newborn rabbit are among the images that you find here, as if it was kind of an album, a kind of zoo, or echoing the 19th century naturalist albums of animals, insects and plants. but also anticipating, if you remember that, the new vision photography of the 1920s in books like Moholy-Nagy here, who had also X-rays of frogs precisely, and other things, which were also, in a way, these books encyclopedic, as if the whole world had to be seen again, no more precisely as if there was a whole new world. Moholy will later write, and this may be interest to the architects in the room too, that the passion for transparency is one of the most spectacular features of our time. In X-ray photos, structure becomes transparency, and transparency manifests structure. In fact, what interests me mostly here is precisely how X-ray image transformed the visual field long before the avant-garde, long before Moholy-Nagy, long before the futurists, long before all the artists that use X-ray. The X-ray became a new kind of realism, if you want, which was in no way in opposition to mysticism or occultism or spiritualism. For example, William Crookes here, the scientist who developed the cathode tube used by Röntgen, this is the equipment of Röntgen, was the president of the Society of Psychical Research, and between a year of the discovery of X-rays, announced that the X-rays produce a new sense of reality based not on outer surface but on inner vibrations, closer to consciousness itself. And this is also, of course, very close to Annie Besant's theories. The X-ray was an optical and philosophical revolution that swept the world at an astonishing speed. The first surgery with X-ray was carried out in the USA between 2 months of the discovery, and the first fully fledged department of radiology was in Glasgow between a year. It is important also to note that albums of X-rays that proliferated everywhere were still presented as images on the screen. Even popular books like this, for example, 1898 French book, The Photography of the Invisible, carefully notes below each image that it is a shadow of a screen. For example, they don't say X-ray of a frog or X-ray of a hand. They say X-ray or shadow of a hand on a screen of platinum, etc. So they have to insist that the image is on a screen. Why is that? The caption is needed because the screen itself has disappeared. It has the same color of the paper. The caption reminds the reader then that there is a screen there, a screen that was originally paper. The shadow image takes the place and the modality of a drawing. It's kind of a ghostly trace hanging before the viewer and offering a deep gaze into the secrets of a body or even the cosmos itself. The floating, disappearing screen becomes the most powerful of instruments. Here is a little bit of how the equipment work, and this is some examples of how they decided how a diamond was real or not on the basis of X-ray. But Röntgen was actually really fascinated that he could produce the effect directly on the photographic plate. And actually, between a year of the discovery, Eastman Kodak developed a special plate for X-rays, and a thin, transparent surface will eventually take the responsibility for the screen when Eastman introduced film, replacing those glass photographic plates of the beginning. But this doubling, if you want, this eerie status of the shadow image remain. The photograph of Bertha's hand, or any of these hands, is the image of an image, the proof, in that case, of what Röntgen had seen countless times on the screen. It is, in a way, still the image of the screen. This magical and threatening screen effect rippled through society, becoming a new form of spectacle, as it is as if nothing could be seen the same way. Everything needed to be rethought. Every field seemed to be affected by this new magic screen. Science and medicine, of course. Here is somebody who has backshot and is being about to be operated, and the X-ray, this is between months of the discovery, is used to locate the place of the damage. but it was also used for policing and entertainment, religion, and spirituality, where many seize upon the X-ray as a proof of what they believe all along. From the very beginning, this visual revolution was understood as an assault on privacy, even a form of indecency. And it's kind of interesting because almost all the images that you see of the X-rays are always women with being subjected to the gaze of the male doctors. It was like, if you think about it, like if you didn't know anything, it's like nobody had tuberculosis, no men had tuberculosis, when in fact it was much more prevalent among men than among women. There's always these naked or semi-naked women with the screen. The London newspaper, for example, Pall Mall Gazette, in 1896, they wrote, "We are sick of the wronged race. It is now said that you can see other people's bones with the naked eye. On the revolting indecency of this, there is no need to dwell." Cartoons and comical poems also explore the new space of exposure. Like, for example, this poem in the Electrical Review that talks about exactly so, the wronged race, what is disgrace, the times ablaze, with the new face of X-rays wasting and full of days, shock and amaze, for nowadays I hear they will gaze through cloak and gown and even stays, this naughty wronged race. So whether it's in serious ways or in the form of cartoon, everybody's horrified by the idea of this exposure. It's kind of interesting in the case of the London newspaper that they talk about the indecency of seeing bones with the naked eye. Shortly after the invention, merchants start to offer X-ray proof underwear, which, by the way, is the same thing that happened recently when customs in the United States and in other countries introduced these full body screens, and particularly in America, they were very concerned about their privacy, and all of a sudden there were all these advertisements for X-ray proof underwear. And a New Jersey assemblyman is supposed to have introduced a bill to ban X-ray opera glasses should they ever be invented. Thomas, they were never invented, of course, but just in case, right? Thomas Edison, who exhibited X-rays to the public in the New York Electrical Exhibition of 1896, even imagined that X-rays could eventually read people's thoughts. So that's how deeply the fantasy was. The X-ray was also an immense form of entertainment. There were X-ray machines in every possible fair, scientific or popular. A leaflet distributed in the 1986 exhibition at the Crystal Palace of London, for example, reads, "Before leaving the exhibition, see the wondrous X-ray, the greatest scientific discovery of the age, X-ray photographies taken, etc." So that was very important. Not only see the X-ray, but you can go out with your own X-ray. That happened also in this French department store, the grand magazine Du Fayel, who alternated demonstrations of X-ray machines with demonstration of the Lumiere brothers moving pictures. And customers again could have their X-rays taken of their hand, of their feet, and take them home as a souvenir. And this is the amazing thing, because you may not have thought about this, and I never thought about that either, but cinematography and the X-ray were born between weeks of each other. And it's also very interesting that they immediately understood the entertainment value of both of them, to the point that entrepreneurs bought also, not only scientists or doctors, bought X-ray equipment, but entrepreneurs also bought their X-ray equipment, so much so they thought that in many places they thought that the X-ray would have more entertainment value than movies, right? So you see in this particular period ads in trade magazines of empresarios trying to exchange their movie projectors for X-ray equipment, but not the other way around. So I think it's really incredible that in light of what happened then in the 20th century, that in this early moment people thought that X-ray would be more entertaining than movies. Okay, so you could have your X-rays taken anywhere from Paris to these studios in New York, and even in Chicago there were slot machines. In Chicago you could have your X-ray for $1. X-rays were also immediately used for policing, as they use now, in customs and checkpoints where suitcases and people were subjected to exposure. For example, here in Paris railway stations, the police is looking at luggage as early as 1898. An illustration in a Parisian newspapers shows how a woman is hiding a bottle of liquor under her dress, who is exposed by the machine, as the glass of course contains lead and becomes visible next to her femur in the X-ray. What is crucial here is, if you want, the architecture of the scene. She is suspended in a way, as we are all still, behind this floating screen held in place by the assistant on the right. She is occupying a new radical space of exposure. The X-ray, in other words, was architecture from the beginning and remains so, and can be seen in many, many images, including these early photographs of the Röntgen. Another example of the women are always the one with the tuberculosis, something else. You never see the other way around, right? The early images of these women suspended between the screen. And even in the 40s, this kind of attractive blonde behind a screen, which actually was made, believe it or not, as a publicity image to reassure the public that the radiation that an X-ray will give you was negligible, no problem, right? She, in any case, is occupying this new technological space defined by a screen rather than walls, a glowing screen with this shadow image. We are still in this territory, that's the point that I'm trying to establish, of Bertha Röntgen and the Ur image of her hand. The mysteries of the interior are brought to the surface by a screen, and the flesh becomes this faint outline. The body is literally turned inside out. Well, Western architecture, of course, at least since the Renaissance, has modeled itself on the human body. With the arrival of the X-ray, the body is inverted, with the inside becoming the outside. Modern architecture very quickly absorbed the logic of the screen and even of the shadow image. In glass architecture, the logic of the X-ray, you could say, applies. There is an outer screen that disappears in order to reveal this or to register this ghostly image of the inside. It is, in my view, X-ray architecture, modern architecture. As with Röntgen transformative images, X-ray architecture becomes also an image of an image. The effect of an X-ray rather than an actual X-ray. That is, it's not so much that the inside of the building is exposed. In fact, you don't see exactly what is going on there. You have this ghostly image, which is very much what you have in an X-ray. So it's not so much that the inside of the building is exposed, but that the building itself represents exposure, and this exposure occurs on a screen. In that sense, glass is called to simulate transparency. This X-ray effect was integral also to the new discourse about transparency. In this famous book of Arthur Korn in Germany, 1929, Glass in Construction and as a Commodity, he catalogues the new uses of glass and remarks as if surprised. He's an architect, an architectural historian. He's writing in 1929, and look at what he writes. He was still surprised by this effect. The outside wall is no longer the first impression one gets of a building. It is the interior. The space is in depth, and the structural frame which delineates then that one begins to notice through the glass walls. Glass is noticeable yet not quite visible. It is the great membrane full of mystery, delicate yet tough. So I mean, I'm fascinated that he's still surprised by this effect. And this is some of the images that he shows, of course, of the Bauhaus or Sonnenstrahl in Hilversum, or again the catalog. The Bauhaus. This sense of mystery of the X-ray infuses Korn's book, as in this photograph, for example, of the Bauhaus in Dessau, where the glass wall is kind of a ripple. The volume of the building somehow between looms without definition. Kuhn's discussion of transparency is again an uncanny echo of Rongen's discussion of new forms of transparency in the very first publication of the discovery of the X-ray. Just of the body of the Bauhaus building appears here as a kind of blurry thing through the not quite visible glass. Rongen also writes about the flesh becoming this mysterious shadow while the bones are perfectly visible. Well, modern, this is the effect exactly, the Bauhaus and the glass. Modern buildings even start to look like X-ray images. This is, of course, Mies van der Rohe rendering of his glass skyscraper of 1919, and it's significant that Mies starts during that early moment of the 20th century to speak about his work as skin and bones architecture. And in his Friedrichstrasse skyscraper of 1919 and the glass skyscraper of 1922, you can see as if you were seeing the building through an X-ray. So he produces this effect in the rendering. Mies, by the way, was deeply affected by X-ray, collected X-ray, even published X-ray, as for example this image of the outline of the head of a woman and the X-ray of the head that he published in Gestaltung, again during, and he even puts an image of a bone here next to his glass skyscraper in an issue of Mirth, in case we have missed the point. But to make the story short, Mies was not alone at all. Books on modern architecture, you could say, that look like are filled really with images of glowing glass skins revealing inner bones and organs. They look like X-ray albums of photography. Think, for example, about the Corbusier glass skyscraper here, or about the Bauhaus, which we already saw, or about the Biennial factory in the Rotterdam, or about Socken, Mendelssohn's Socken department store in Stuttgart, about the Crystal House of George Cake in the World Exhibition in Chicago of 1934 with Bucky Fuller's car in the garage, or many other examples, even by architects that we don't know so well, like the Glass Palace in the Netherlands here, during the day and at night, because of course at night the effect is more intense, but it's also clear that this is an X-ray, even more of an X-ray during the day. Also Bucky Fuller, Diamaxion House, etc., and many other examples that will come to your mind. Once you start thinking about X-ray and modern architecture, there is no way to miss it. You start thinking about the whole history of canonic modern architecture as the history of an X-ray kind of album. Like the same albums of X-rays that proliferated during that period seem to have taken the same aesthetic, and there is all these albums of photographs of glass revealing the insides of buildings. The development of the X-ray and of modern architecture, in fact, coincides and develops in parallel. If experiments with glass were numerous in the early years of the 20th century, they still tended to be like exoteric and not quite realized experiments by avant-garde architects, such as the glass pavilion of Bruno Taut in the Fair of Cologne, or the Barcelona pavilion, still of 1929, or this Mies van der Rohe glass house on the hillside of 1934. So they are either fantasies in paper that the architect is unable to realize, or they are pavilions in fair. But it's only by mid-century precisely that the glass house is finally realized in the Farnsworth house in Illinois near Chicago, and the Philip Johnson glass house in New Canaan, Connecticut, both those houses of 1949. Just as the X-ray exposes the inside of the body to the public eye, modern architecture decides to expose its interior. This exposure, in case you think this is a funny thing for the super upper class, like Philip Johnson, this transparency becomes actually a mass phenomenon with the picture window at mid-century. This is actually an advertisement for a picture window that becomes super common in America in the post-war years, and this phenomena of the desire for this picture window coincides exactly with the moment in which everybody has to have their X-ray taken in the schools, in the military, in the wherever, right, in the factories, etc. So mass phenomena of the transparency of the house coincides with the mass phenomena of the surveillance of not people showing symptoms of tuberculosis, but of everybody, right? And it's not just the house that has to be see-through, but everything seems to be, you have to see through everything, from Paris cookware to Sarambra to windows in ovens and washing machines. Everything has to be seen through. I mean, I can understand you, maybe it's a good idea actually, you can see through the oven because maybe it's burning or something, but why do we have to see through washing machines? Why do we have this desire, this particular moment to see through absolutely everything is the point. Even everything is subjected to the X-rays, even cars, as in this 1946 image of a Jeep, that was in Life magazine as the world's biggest X-ray, and made its way into the exhibition Parallel of Life and Art at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London in 1953, and here they are in preparation, and you can see it here to the right of the little girl, the daughter of Henderson, I think. The front cover of that catalog, the catalog of the Parallel of Life and Art exhibition, you will remember better, it has this 1941 X-ray image of a man using an electric saber. This actually was taken from Moholina's 1947 Vision in Motion, where it was described as the work of two doctors in New Jersey, in a New Jersey laboratory. And in fact, the image had already been published in Mechanics Illustrated, so there's this continuous borrowing, right? From the doctors into the popular press, and from the popular press into Moholina's, and then into the ICA. And I want to insist on this because, again, it comes absolutely always from the popular press up. So it's taken from Mechanics Illustrated, where is probably where Moholy got it from. And Moholy, by the way, also was picking up images of X-ray from magazines like Wendingen in 1920s, which goes to show us that architectural magazine, apart from showing architecture, they were also publishing X-ray images from very early on. In fact, by the time of Moholy-Nagy book, X-ray had evolved from being radical images representing the hidden truth of things to become almost routine elements of everyday life. Starting in the 1930s, shoe stores in the United States used X-ray machines for shoe fittings without any kind of protection from radioactivity, which, by the way, these machines were not banned until 1970. So imagine all this generation of kids putting their, or people putting their feet through the X-ray machine to see how their shoes fit. Also in the 1930s, the mass X-raying of citizens on a regular basis started, and you have this incredible phenomena where people, women in particular, again, here we go, will not only dedicate their rosy picture of their rosy selves to their boyfriends, but also their picture of their healthy lungs, to Tom, with all my love, in both the picture and the X-rays. As I say, it's also at mid-century that the mass X-raying of the entire population becomes a reality. With this new development, the now visible interior of the body becomes precisely not just a tool for the diagnosis of some illness, but also the site of a new form of public surveillance. The post-war mobilization against TB included programs in department stores, in industries, in schools, in public markets, sometimes with these mobile vans. Over a period of half a century, an experimental medical tool had been transformed into a mechanism of surveillance for the entire population. This association between X-ray and the association between X-ray and glass houses also becomes a very popular commonplace in mid-century literature. For example, in this film, Highlights and Shadows, which is again a kind of publicity film to convince people to take their X-ray, and again you will think probably they have to convince people to take their X-ray. because of the fear of radiation. They were not afraid of radiation. Again, they were afraid of being exposed. They were afraid of the invasion of their privacy. And it's very interesting because there is this film done by Kodak, and I hate this. How does it do that? Where a woman again, wearing a swimming suit is shown strapped to this laboratory table. As the image of her body gives way to the image of the X-ray, the narrator, which is a man, of course, he says that this young lady, to whom henceforth a glass house should hold no terror, will, after an examination of her radiograph, be reassured that she is indeed physically fit. In other words, what is strange about this quotation is it doesn't say this young woman, after an examination of an X-ray, will be convinced that she is healthy. It says this young woman, who after taking her X-ray will no longer be terrified to live in a glass house, will now also be reassured that she's physically fit. So the glass house is actually a symbol of a new form of surveillance and of health. In case you think this is something weird of popular culture, a similar set of association can be found in the discourse surrounding canonic works of modern architecture. In an interview in House Beautiful, Edith Farnsworth, here in the screen, who was a successful doctor in Chicago, compared her famous Farnsworth house, her weekend house, designed by Mies van der Rohe in 1949, to an X-ray. And he writes, I don't keep a garbage can under my sink. Do you know why? Because you can see the whole kitchen from the road on the way in here, and the can will spoil the appearance of the whole house. So I hide it in the closet farther down from the sink. Mies talks about free space, but this space is very fixed. I can't even put a clothes hanger in my house without considering how it affects everything from the outside. Any arrangement of furniture becomes a major problem because the house is transparent like an X-ray. So she's making again this association between the X-ray and the house. The use of the metaphor of the X-ray, of course, was not accidental. It's not by chance that Farnsworth goes on to say that her house, that there is a local rumor in the village that the house is a tuberculosis sanatorium. So for her, the house is an X-ray, and in the village they say this is a sanatorium, right? Modern architecture, in other words, was presented and understood as a piece of medical equipment. And here, as a side, I will tell you something which I don't understand yet, which is why is he so obsessed with the kitchen can, when in fact it's not that you see the kitchen from the hall, you see the bedroom, you see the bed, and there doesn't seem to be any contents in, at least in these early pictures, so perhaps just complain about that. In any way, very quickly, we are finishing here. I don't want to take more of your time. There are tons of things to see and to do in this exhibition. Modern architecture cannot be understood outside tuberculosis and its dominant diagnostic tool, which is the X-ray. Indeed, the principles of modern architecture seem to be taken straight out of a medical test on the disease. A year before, the German microbiologist Robert Koch discovered the tubercle bacillus in 1882, a standard medical book gave as the causes of the disease the following: unfavorable climate, sedentary indoor life, defective ventilation, and deficiency of light. It took a very, very long time for these notions to lose credibility. As Susan Sontag wrote in her beautiful book, Illness as Metaphor, the tuberculosis patient was thought to be helped, even cured, by a change of environment. There was a notion that tuberculosis was a wet disease, a disease of humid and dank cities, that the inside of the body had become damp and it had to be dried out. Modern architecture pick up precisely on this question. Here you have Le Corbusier, who demonized, of course, historic Paris. Historic Paris, in case you cannot read there, historic Paris, tubercular Paris, before he proposes his erasure of the center of Paris. He has to identify it as sick. But it's not just historical Paris that is tubercular Paris, but the 19th century architecture with all this dust and all these germs and all these things is also demonized as unhealthy, as for example in this exhibition in Stuttgart, and health, sun, light, ventilation. I'm finishing. You're looking for me? Yeah. I'm finishing. Sun, light, ventilation, roof terraces, hygiene and whitening were offered as a means to prevent, if not to cure, tuberculosis. The publicity campaign of modern architecture was organized around contemporary beliefs about tuberculosis and fears of the disease. Modern architecture not only thinks of itself as providing sanitary conditions for everyday life, but even thinks of buildings as diagnostic instruments, as, you know, sanitary conditions. I mean, like when you have these open air rooms, this one designed by Pierre Sarot, not for people that are unhealthy, like the tuberculosis patients, but everybody, like in Richard Neutre's houses and some similar houses, sleeps outside to prevent tuberculosis. So everybody believes in this condition. But Le Corbusier writes, if the house is all white, the outline of things stand out from it without any possibility of mistake. Everything stands out from it and is recorded absolutely black and white. It is honest and dependable. It is rather like an X-ray of beauty. And in fact, modern architecture and even modern furniture, even books on modern architecture take on this aesthetics, if you want, of the X-ray. Le Corbusier metaphor was not accidental. Screening the body for tuberculosis meant optically penetrating areas of the body previously invisible. X-ray created a new kind of vision, a new paradigm of truth that architects could not resist, and nothing could be more modern. The TB sufferer, and this is Susan Sontag, whose book was very influential in the early stages of this work many years ago, wrote in her notebooks that are now in her archives in UCLA in Los Angeles, the TB, the tuberculosis sufferer is a wanderer. The patient travels to find a cure. There is a geography of health. You know. This nomadic figure, you can say, is also the paradigmatic client of modern architecture that enters modern building like entering any other medical apparatus. Architecture here is less about shelter and more about a kind of exposure, an X-ray exposure. The idea that one could see through buildings and clothing challenged all assumptions and social protocols about privacy and psychological well-being. Again, Susan Sontag writes, TB tuberculosis makes the body transparent, where to have cancer is to become more than normally opaque. The X-ray permits one, often for the first time, to see one's inside, to become transparent to oneself, she writes. And indeed, you may remember that from reading Thomas Mann, The Magic Mountain. The tuberculosis patients in the sanatoriums of Thomas Mann carried their X-ray or those of their loved ones in their breast pockets. When Claudia so sad, Hans Kanstor, the protagonist of the Magic Mountain love object, leaves the sanatorium, she gives him her X-ray as a memento, like this woman that we just saw. And then Thomas Mann writes, then he flung himself into his chair and drew out his keepsake, his treasure that consisted this time not of a few reddish-brown shavings, but a thin glass plate which he must held toward the light to see anything on it. It was Claudia's X-ray portrait, showing not her face, but the delicate bony structure of the upper half of her body and the organs of the thoracic cavity surrounded by the pale gauze-like envelope of flesh. How often he had looked at it, how often pressed it to his lips in the time which since then had passed and brought with it senses. The X-ray, to conclude, then, is a kind of self-exposure, a new, more intimate kind of portrait. The intrusive logic of medical and police surveillance, with the body unable to resist a new penetrating gaze, gives way to a new kind of tender intimacy. This seemingly cloudy space of the X-ray becomes an architecture in its own right that can be inhabited and is inhabited. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.